So today we're going to be taking a look at Russian military Sambo. I'm going to go through a little bit of the history and everything about it, and we'll see some interesting things about this system. You know, it's one of the systems that I like the most. I'm very much focused on the real combative usage of stuff. Everybody knows that. Anybody who's followed me for the past couple of years, you know that. That's why I'm very focused on the military stuff, because the military stuff is usually what works better in a street environment, in real combat type of situations, more than the sports stuff. Sports stuff is good. There's a lot of things that are beneficial in the training, but in general, I gravitate more towards the military component of martial arts. The military-oriented training within martial arts. So that's sometimes a more old-style way of doing things. That's why I like these kind of old-style videos like this. This is like Soviet-era stuff that they're showing here. And actually, Sambo, it's an interesting one because it's short for, I'm going to butcher these names all throughout here because I had like one Russian class in my entire life. So bear with me over here. So it stands for Samozachita bez Oruzha, Oruzia, or something like this. However, it is pronounced correctly in Russian. I wish I could have taken some more Russian classes. So that basically is Sam, and then Bez and Oruzia are B and O, so Sambo, right? So basically, it's a Russian martial art that was developed during the Soviet Union in 1920s, around that time, in the early 20th century. And basically, they wanted to have something that they could rely on in order to, use in close quarter combat with their soldiers and their Spetsnaz group, special operations, their intelligence services. There was the guys, in the old days, the KGB and all this stuff. So those are the things that they wanted this for, so that those guys could have access to a homegrown functional training system that works within the confines and understanding of what their doctrine is and that their principles are for close quarter combatives and stuff like that. Whereas originally, there was judo and jujitsu and all that kind of stuff, which they originally started to draw things from, but that was not really 100% adaptable to the Russian environment and also to the specific type of units that they wanted to apply this to. So that's why they decided to build their own thing. And I think that's probably a good idea because the current iterations of Russian Sambo, military Sambo, are far better than 99% of the jiu-jitsu or judo styles that you're going to encounter around the world to study. So in my opinion, Russian Sambo is a much, much better thing to learn. And I would much prefer to learn that. Now, recently, because of the political situation around the world, you see a lot of this anti-Russian bullshit going around all over the place. People, talking negative about Russia, waving Ukrainian flags endless, ignoring completely that the Ukrainians were bombing the Russians and murdering the Russians in the Donbass and all of this. The context of the problems are always gone from the media. But the propaganda is left over, and the propaganda is basically the Russians are evil, the Ukrainians are all angels, and that everything is beautiful on the Eastern Front now, where we can beat back the Russians. But the fact is that Russia is a great country. It has a long history. There's a lot of martial arts in Russia. There's a lot of sword fighting in Russia, knife fighting in Russia, a lot of indigenous styles of martial arts within Russia and Russian culture that offer a lot. If you see the UFC nowadays, also, most of the UFC is dominated by these top Russian fighters. There's like one area of Russia that's very Muslim. It's traditional Muslim area. And they produce some of the best fighters in the world, like Islam Makhachev, the other one, Habib Nurmagomedov, and all the rest of them. These guys they're no joke. And a lot of the training on the background of a lot of these guys, Emelianenko, Fedor Emelianenko, before in the older days. A lot of these guys, their background is combat Sambo and all of these kind of things, a sport Sambo, military Sambo. They have this type of Sambo background. So this stuff's not coming out of nowhere, and it's not like it has never proven itself. It is a very effective system. So the Soviets knew what they were doing, and historically they knew what they were doing. The KGB was no joke. And in close quarter combat, as well as in close quarter assassinations, they were using this stuff. So it is definitely, definitely effective in the battlefield and in sports as well. It has proven itself in sports as well. So basically, the 1920s and 30s really saw Sambo taking shape And there were a couple of guys. The first one was Vasily Olshepkov. Again, I'm destroying the names. Viktor Spiridonov. And there was another gentleman. What was his name again? I have the name here. Yeah, those were the two prominent ones. But there was another gentleman over there who was also very inspirational and key in actually building the curriculum and everything and the whole structure of Sambo at the beginning. So it kind of evolved into the number one thing that all of the different units were doing. But the cool thing is that with Sambo, they modified things a lot for the different units so that one unit would be learning military Sambo, the other unit will be learning KGB Sambo, the other groups would be learning police Sambo, and they would have all learning Sambo, but different components of it and different ways to apply it into their environment and the type of tools that they were carrying within their environment. So basically, when it comes to principles and techniques, military Sambo has a couple of major components in it. The major number one component is striking. And then you've got grappling. Grappling, those two things. These are the major components, striking and grappling. If you see them in close quarters, functioning, doing their thing, they're really good strikers in close quarters. They know how to fight really well. The striking techniques are great, and they're amazing standing grapplers. And you see the kind of techniques that they're doing from standing grappling, striking in close, and then going for very, very nasty targets like in the groin and the eyes and things like this. But they do it from the perspective of people who are actually engaged in real fighting. It's not a static thing. These guys actually fight. They have like competitions. They fight full contact. They actually know how to execute these techniques with good timing in real situations. And so they're really very, very impressive. So striking and grappling, number one component with them. Next, you're going to see a lot of submission type of stuff and a lot of different types of direct kill techniques because it's mostly military based. The sports stuff, no, of course, you're not going to see that. But for the military stuff, you will see that. For the KGB stuff, you will see that as well. And then you'll see that there are different techniques applied in those situations, depending on the units which are going to be using this stuff. So there was a lot, of course, inspired from different places. You've got judo, you've got jujitsu, you've got karate, you've got all the different, like old style Japanese stuff where a lot of information was drawn from. But then also boxing. Boxing as well has influenced a lot of Western boxing, has influenced a lot of different martial arts, especially more modern martial arts that see the value of Western boxing and close quarter combat. For me personally, I'm a big fan of boxing as well, even though I'm primarily a blade fighter and I focus a lot on the blade. It doesn't matter. Boxing is still, if you take boxing and you do a couple of different movements with the boxing and make some modifications and then start putting in blade work and put a knife in the person's hand, you really have a pretty effective way of using a knife. So it doesn't take a lot to move from a hook punch to putting in a knife into that person's hand. So there's a lot that can come in with boxing that can be very useful because of the hand techniques that are involved, whether it's uppercuts and stuff like that. Now here we see more of the military component that's happening in the background over here. This is really, really cool stuff. When you see how it's adapted into the military environment, the empty hand combatives with the rifles, with their handguns, all of this type of things, and also the improvised weapons, that the KGB were using, like the umbrella with the what's it called there, with the knife at the end, the poison dagger at the end, and stuff like that. All these weirdo old KGB weapons. And then they used their close quarter combat Sambo techniques in case the person tries to stop the assassination technique or something like that. Then the weapon will be used in a different way. It's quite amazing. Quite amazing, very cool. Now, as you can see through a lot of this, sweeps are very, very included into all of this stuff. They sweep, they take you from vertical to horizontal and take you down. So that's, really an interesting part of Sambo as well. And then you've got this weird aspect of it like this, where you've got you've got improvised weapons that are used to tie people up like you see in the Japanese old style, I think it's called Hojo Jitsu or something like that, where the Japanese used to use ropes and things like that to tie up their adversaries. That kind of stuff you'll see in Sambo also if you don't have any type of regular, conventional control tools available in order to hold somebody down. So ground fighting again, another one, but their ground fighting is very interesting. And again, similar like Silat Sharaf, we don't have ground fighting per se, like lying on the ground, because when you have multiple adversaries, lying on the ground like that isn't the best solution. There's nothing wrong with it. It functions in certain environments, but it doesn't function in environments where there are multiple possible adversaries in an environment. And in that type of situation, you always need to prefer mobility. You can prioritize mobility over anything else. Mobility is more important than control of a single individual in one static situation. So you'll see that as well in Sambo. Very, very interesting. Another very cool thing about Sambo is that it's been used multiple times by all of these different units in the real world. So Spetsnaz has used it actually in multiple confrontations. It's been used by the police and terrorism units in Russia as well. And in many different scenarios, a lot of these techniques have been used and refined over the years in order to make them what you see today. So that's an interesting thing also where that you don't see in a lot of other systems, which are not used by people who are actually in the line of fire on a regular basis. If you speak to police or paramedics or any of these people, military people who are involved with direct confrontation with other people, okay? I'm not talking about the ones who are sitting in base. I'm talking about people like military police or regular civilian police that are in the city police or paramedics or nurses or people and people, believe it or not, nurses and doctors in hospitals get attacked in the emergency room all the time. People go crazy in the emergency rooms. I had one police officer say to me one time, I'll never forget this. He said, I saw more close quarter combat in the emergency rooms than I saw on the street as a police officer. I found that to be very funny, but it is indicative of how much violence sometimes is present within emergency room situations or in a medical environment where you're supposed to be helping people, but people don't see that help. They see that you're trying to hurt them or hurt their friends or something like that, and then they go crazy and attack you. Or it's just people who have mental problems or people who are on drugs or things like that. But violence is normal in those kind of environments. It's not a good thing, but it happens a lot. So when you deal with people who are using their martial art in those type of environments, what's really, really nice to see is that a lot of the times those curriculums are updated regularly. Those techniques and everything are pushed and to the limits within training, and they're changed a little bit. They're modified. They're improved. They're melded together. There are things that are done to improve them that you don't see in systems where people don't actually use those techniques in order to fight in the real world, in order to survive in the real world. So that's an interesting thing. And you'll see the same thing in sport martial arts. And that's why the sport component of Sambo is consistently evolving too, because they're using it on a regular basis. If you're always using something, you will see that that thing is good or not good, or how you can change it or improve it. People will always want to improve. That's a natural evolution of combatives within that context where it's being used. So Sambo basically the two elements of it, the military side and the sports side, are very popular and very well known. But the sports side has become much more famous nowadays because of the UFC, because of people like Fedor Emelianenko and all the rest of these guys who are very famous in mixed martial arts stuff. And now the Russians have basically taken over from Dagestan and all the rest. They've basically taken over the mixed martial arts environment right now. So they're the hottest ticket there is, no doubt. So I'd say nowadays Sambo is probably growing in influence. There, like I said, the anti-Russian rhetoric is all over the place in the media, but the effectiveness of Sambo cannot be denied. It cannot be denied. When you look at it, when you go through their curriculum, when you actually train with them and you see the techniques and the way that they execute and their capabilities that they have, you're immediately impressed. You know what you're dealing with, and it's something that is not to be fooled around with. So, in conclusion, when it comes to Sambo, one of my favorite martial arts, and if I had, I mentioned this the other day, if I had to choose one martial art which wasn't Pencak Silat, I had to choose something else. Sambo would probably be one of the things that I would choose to learn outside of Pencak Silat. I'm a lover of Pencak Silat since I was young. It's the most effective thing that I've found in my life. But for Sambo, I would say it is the next step that if I didn't have Silat, it would definitely be something that I would consider learning. And if there was a good Sambo practitioner that was, for example, giving a seminar or something, and they were very good at what they are doing, I would have no issue at all to spend my day learning something like this. Okay, so that's my opinion on the combat Sambo. I think it's an excellent system if you can find a great instructor, like everything else. And I'm really very, very interested in the Russian martial arts in general, and even more so now because of all the anti-Russian sentiment. And it makes me even more interested in what they're doing over there because I like their politics. I like the way that they do stuff. I like their diplomacy, their military ways of doing things. I'm a very big fan of the Russian military environment and how they operate. So, and also their diplomacy. I think they have great diplomats in Russia. Sergei Lavrov is like one of my favorite international political figures, and so is Vladimir Putin. So, yeah. So whatever it is, people can criticize the Russians, but they're pretty good when it comes to fighting. They've got a lot to offer, and there's a lot of history over there that's very interesting.